l'amour, 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 l'amour,
And I think I am just going to sit
Pour cette journée de la mime, une exposition de photos et documentaires.
ultimately, let's try and see whether we can turn around a few chairs because you can see what I mean by hello, Matthias. I'm doing a bit of choreography, you know. Yeah. Do you know Peter? No. Expert to expert. Who are going to help me get through this. So at the beginning, I'm here with the presentations and I see the remote people. Then
Well, all right.
You gotta have a determination
topic at the moment in and Germany's the country or one of them, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, they're going to have
yeah.
to nuclear or coal, what do they say?
Get as much gas as you can in the short term.
Yes, and there's LNG gas coming from the US.
Yes, yeah.
So,
But that's very short term.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's what we hope.
yes, yes, indeed. And of course, once the world's attention is away from these shipments, more people will be buying Russian oil and gas. You know, at the moment they're keeping
Possibly,
a low
yeah,
profile
yeah.
because they don't want the bad publicity.
Yeah. Although I mean, it also depends what part of the world you're in. So in Indonesia, we also like Indonesia. They're quite pro-Russian in general because they're anti-US,
Yes.
right? But what their worry is that they're already struggling to export their fossil fuels, and when Russian gas and oil come there, because they can't go west anymore,
Yes,
it's
a big glut.
big glut. So it really depends where you are,
Yeah,
you know.
So of course, we've got a
We can
very
get-
European
exactly.
perspective.
So there's a European perspective and there's an American
Yes,
perspective,
yes.
which is an opportunity.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And then there's other parts of the world to go. Well, we're not really aligned with Europe or US anyway, so
And I mean, because I train lots of different people, it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's our wars, it's not like that. But they've got other concerns in Africa and Asia, you know, it's not really impacting.
yeah.
And the Indians are just benefiting from nice cheap oil prices.
Yeah, and well, they're testing out their non-aligned status, right?
Yes, yes, yes,
Is it tenable? It appears to be.
yes, yes, indeed.
Thing, but it's fascinating stuff.
No, but it's really, I mean, I'm interested in the geopolitics of the petrostates.
Yeah.
And then there's the electrostates coming now with all the lithium and the cobalt and the nickel. They're all in, you know, often
Yes.
tricky areas.
A lot of them where China has very successfully controlled a lot of supply
The
chains,
DRC.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all over the place. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. And Russia's got sort of palladium, isn't it? Nickel, things.
Everything.
Everything. Yeah, absolutely. No, we've been caught napping.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Because we tried a strategy which was, free markets and wealth will, trump politics. No, turns out it wasn't true.
Yes, absolutely. Interesting. Okay. So I am just going to set up my Slido there. You sit down there. to double check, I have to put this on to speak. Pour parler, je dois appuyer sur le bouton. 1, 2, 1, 2. Yes, okay. Because I need to put that there and the sliders because I need to see. Yes.
Let's just put another tab.
Yeah.
Go to slido.com, put IC4. That's the
Slide. Yes. Okay, and then here.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you'll see it's in the But once that's
Right.
that's what you see.
Okay.
That's it. So
Right.
when the questions come up, yeah, exactly.
Because you're in.
Yeah,
They'll be here. I'll see these, and these are the ones that have been moderated. Okay, excellent. Yes, understood. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One, two, one, two. 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just to inform, we'll be reconnecting. We are just changing something and we'll be reconnecting 5 minutes.
Energy transition is not the problem, it is the solution. Sustainable energy systems contribute to people's well-being. Clean energy provides access to education and good healthcare. It creates jobs, improves economic conditions, and forms the base of prosperity. It also means a safer environment and more opportunities for women and girls. If there's no longer a need to collect firewood, they can go to school or work instead.
The long-term development of electricity and heat production from renewable energy sources is a key pillar of energy transition. More than 800 million people across the globe do not have access to electricity. Some 3 billion people cook over open fires, which is inefficient and causes indoor pollution. Traditional energy sources contribute significantly to global warming, and if we want to limit their use, we must turn to renewable energies. Hence, access to affordable and clean energy for all is one of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. Due to the high greenhouse gas emissions which are directly or indirectly linked to the energy sector, a swift transition to renewable energy is a key element of the Paris Climate Agreement. One of the biggest challenges in this transition is the synergy between production and consumption, but it's also one of the biggest opportunities. The cleanest form of energy is the energy we never use. The less energy we consume, the less has to be produced.
How can we steer demand towards production from renewable energy sources? Traditionally, electricity is produced in big power plants that are powered by coal, water, nuclear fission, or natural gas. These traditional energy sources easily adapt to fluctuations in electricity consumption. They are not inexhaustible though, and coal, gas, and oil also have a high CO2 emission. Climate-friendly energy sources such as wind, water, sun, biomass, and geothermal energy may be inexhaustible, but they depend on alternating external influences such as the weather. To make electricity from renewable energy sources a key pillar of energy transition, demand and production will have to be more closely matched. This can be done by applying smart grids or by storing energy. Innovative solutions already exist. In regions with lots of sunshine, such as the Sahel, for example, fossil fuels can be easily replaced with solar energy. Even trash, which so far has been a problem in refugee camps, could be used as a source of energy. But to make this transition possible, new framework conditions must be introduced in many parts of the world.
What framework conditions promote change and new investment? We must invest in education and build capacities. We need reforms that accelerate investment in renewable energies, especially by the private sector. We need good and fair financial incentives. Even though fossil fuels are one of the major emission sources, governments across the world still subsidize them with billions of dollars every year. This makes these energy sources cheaper for the end consumer, but it creates unfair competition for renewable energy. It impedes energy transition, which could pose a financial risk in the future. When it comes to total costs, wind and solar energies are already cheaper, which proves that systemic change is possible.
What incentives are needed for energy efficiency in the various end-use sectors? Energy efficiency is needed in various consumption sectors, such as the heating and cooling of buildings, in traffic, or in the industry. Replacing fossil fuels will enable us to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions in these sectors. This transition can be cost-effective if suitable business models and regulations, as well as financial incentives, exist.
The human desire to save money in the short term often stops us from investing in efficient solutions. Recent studies have shown, however, that costs do not increase for people who live in well-insulated houses and use solar and wind power. On the contrary, they even save money. The transition toward renewable energy is cost-effective in the medium and long term, and it protects the environment. Energy transition is not the problem, it is the solution. So let's tackle it together.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our working session here. where we're really going to look at how we accelerate the energy transition. As you may know, 800 million people worldwide don't have access to electricity. And we're going to look at, well, how do we provide enough energy to raise living standards amongst the poor, but also meet those climate change targets, also energy efficiency measures, how can they dampen energy demand? And I'm sure it's all on our minds, the Ukrainian crisis. What's that going to mean for the energy transition? So many of you will know that my name is Claire Doul, and I am going to be asking some questions to a whole panel of experts, and they're going to be giving very concrete examples. You know now that all of the questions are going to come over Slido, so you've got the QR code if people are joining remotely. Here in the room, you know that it is www.slido.com with that hashtag ICForum. And we are going to be taking questions after some of the presentations, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. So really, really looking forward to getting your questions. And of course, if you can multitask, please do tweet at the same time. You know that that's hashtag ICForumCH. So we're going to begin with sustainable energy production. And we're going to look at the challenges and how they can be met. And we're going to hear from an expert, Nadia Taweben, Senior Energy Specialist at the Energy Sector Management Assistant Program, a program of the World Bank. So I hand over now to Nadia, who's going to give us her thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today and to share some insights on how sustainable and bankable renewable energy programs can contribute to fast track the energy transition. If it's possible to have the presentation now. Thank you very much. So next slide, please. So let me start with one number. 900 gigawatt of solar and wind that are still to be built by 2025. So we are talking about quite a tight timeline. So there is a general consensus about the benefits that renewable energy can bring, and the video you've seen before reminded us of that. Yet these targets are lagging behind. Next, please. So there is a critical role that the government has to play to make that projects happen in sustainable conditions, in particular to be able to attract the private sector. I think one of the key messages here is that there is no way to get there without involving the private investments, the private sector, I mean. When we look at the amount of money needed, so approximately 150 billion per year until 2025 to get those 900 gigawatt of solar and wind on the ground. Next. Thank you. There are critical challenges that are hindering a sustained and significant deployment of privately owned renewable energy projects in most developing countries. And this has been, I'm showing on this slide some of those key challenges that have been flagged in a constant manner by the private sector through numerous market soundings. Number one, the weak enabling environments with the lack of expertise from counterparts, as well as inadequate regulatory frameworks very often. In addition, a lack of bankable projects procured competitively, as a lot of countries are transitioning from bilateral deals to competitive bidding. A lack of access to risk mitigation coverage, which has even been aggravated by the COVID crisis, which has severely hit the utilities, which are very often the public off-takers, and that has increased the risk premium. And last but not least, grid integration issues for variable that are linked to the need to integrate variable renewable energy in the grid. And this has become really a significant issue as countries are trying to scale up their renewables toward that the pathway toward the energy transition. So when you have a first projects, usually they are the closest to the grid, best irradiation, and a lot of funding to de-risk them. And countries manage to get, in some cases, good tariffs. But as they want to scale up, this grid integration issue is a major bottleneck. So as a result, what we see today is not really a shortage of financing, but rather a piecemeal approach that is preventing countries to make the most out of their renewable energy resources, and the lack of projects that for the private sector to invest into. Next, please. So how to fix that? We believe at the World Bank that a comprehensive and integrated approach is absolutely critical to fast track the energy transition, starting by supporting countries to do a sound planning to identify sustainable renewable energy targets, and to define a strategy to implement them. So like not only look at those quick wins or low-hanging fruits, but look at also from a medium-term horizon, what is it that makes sense from them in terms of renewable energy pathway, which as you heard in the video, are very often the cheapest options. And not only define this enabling environment with those upstream or this strategy and those targets, but also help them operationalize those targets through downstream assistance, so a robust procurement with a bankable allocation. And in addition to this comprehensive and integrated technical assistance, it is critical to tackle the grid investments that are needed to unlock private investments in renewables. As I mentioned before, this is really a key challenge to scale up renewables. And this needs to be tackled from both perspectives. Of course, energy access, from energy access, it's also absolutely critical. And last but not least, provide tailored risk mitigation coverage to reduce the risk premium for to reduce the critical risks perceived by the private sector. And use for that, the use of climate finance is from that perspective critical, not only to make those public investments more affordable for countries, but also to help provide instruments with a high risk appetite to be able to provide that comfort to the private sector, and be able to leverage private investments while at the same time maximize the associated socioeconomic benefits. Next, please. So this is why it's critical beyond the clean electricity and energy access to look at, in a comprehensive manner, how for a country, how to position their local players on the value chain of the renewable energy projects to make them benefit from their own pipeline, how to also leverage that opportunity to make the local communities in the vicinity of the project benefit from it through action plans, enhancing their livelihood and increasing their resilience, and also invest significantly in capacity building to empower the local stakeholder with a specific focus on women empowerment. So there is really an opportunity here to build a sustainable ecosystem, leveraging the new opportunities offered by the scaling up of renewables, and maximizing, thanks to this catalytic role of the government, to maximize the associated socioeconomic benefits. And for that, there are a certain number of key questions to address. If we can go please to the next slide. To ensure sustainability, looking at, first of all, I mentioned before the importance of looking at sustainable RE targets on a medium-term horizon. So looking at how much RE can be integrated in the grid, so assessing the grid flexibility and looking at its constraints, how much is needed through sound planning, where it is needed to be able to optimize the cost of the overall system, and when it is needed to address the demand in a timely manner. Looking also in the second part on how to best operationalize those renewable energy targets, looking at optimized roles for the public and the private sector, how to procure the project and leverage the bidding process to maximize the socioeconomic benefits, what risk allocation to be able to attract the private sector in an optimized manner, and how to mitigate those risks to get the tariff as affordable as possible. Next, please. And I would like to share with you two examples to illustrate this approach. One for a utility scale solar project in Burkina Faso and one energy access project in DRC. So on Burkina Faso, we are the World Bank is working with the government to develop, to help them tap into significantly into their solar potential with the targeted increase of photovoltaic penetration in the grid from 16 to 28% in 2025, which is expected to reduce significantly the generation costs and to unlock savings by as less HFO will be consumed. And this it includes having really a catalytic role here from the government perspective, and also relying on battery storage from two perspectives. On one hand, the government will select an independent power producer to build a solar project with battery storage. But in parallel, the government will also invest in publicly owned battery storage to support the grid and to enable such an increase of PV penetration, which would be one of the highest in Africa in terms of penetration of solar. And this example is a good illustration of the approach that I mentioned before, as the World Bank has been supporting them on the four aspects, leveraging a significant amount from the Clean Technology Fund in terms of funding. Another example now on the next slide, please, on the DRC, a Democratic Republic of Congo, which is, despite amazing resources, this country is facing a significant issue in terms of energy access. And we have identified the opportunity to support two capitals improve a very low energy access, which is in the range of 6%, by using large-scale mini-grids. But one of the issues with large-scale mini-grids is linked to the difficulty to attract commercial financing, as there is a lot of uncertainty linked to the business model of mini-grids based on the experience on previous small mini-grids. So here we have applied the same framework that I presented before, but trying to add to this framework an innovative risk mitigation instrument to mitigate the demand during the first years of operation of the large-scale mini-grids to unlock commercial financing. So this project is going to the World Bank board this fiscal year. So next, please. So in conclusion, I wanted just to highlight the fact that there is a need to address the energy system in a comprehensive manner to fast track the energy transition. In the previous slides, I gave you examples focused on the production of sustainable renewable energy. But beyond that, there is the need to align the business, the utility business model, the renewable energy deployment strategy, and the enabling environment with the critical emerging trends, as well as country strategic priorities. So what we see is that a lot of countries are opening up to private generation, with a lot of corporate PPAs being unlocked, but there is still a need, as countries have two processes in parallel. Very often the utility is procuring renewable energy generation for end users, while at the same time the private sector is building plants with corporate PPAs, and there is a need to coordinate between site selection and grid upgrades, also to improve the regulations and to monitor supply to adapt to an evolving demand. When it comes to demand, it's absolutely critical to anticipate the need of businesses that are more and more looking to a green supply, either to protect their revenues or to expand their businesses. And it's critical to take that into account in the strategy of the utility, as some of them may lose key customers if their energy mix is not green enough and fast enough. Take also into account the impacts of the prosumers, more and more prosumers rather than consumers, who want also to tap in solar PV. And this also adds more challenges to the business model of the utility, which very often has to address peak hours after sunset and need to make like substantial investments in the grid through battery storage or other, whereas they are sometimes losing revenue. So there is also a need for them not only to adjust their business model, but also to unlock new revenue streams. And finally, one last point that I would like to make is that when it comes to variable renewable energy, it's important to look, of course, to options in terms of storage, to enable this penetration of renewables, but also to explore regional integration opportunities, which can allow to integrate variable renewable energy and balance the grid with optimized costs. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. And we have got some questions coming in, and please do keep these questions flowing on Slido. You mentioned mini-grids, I think, in your example with the Democratic Republic of Congo, and was saying that it was difficult to get corporate finance, if I remember correctly. Anyway, this is a question that's very popular, which is, can off-grid options such as mini-grids be a more feasible alternative to grid infrastructure investments using public finance in developing countries? What are your thoughts?
So I think it really depends on the context of each country, but I believe that the starting point should be looking at the demand. What's the best way to address the demand? And while looking at the demand, identifying the most optimized electrification strategy for a country. In some cases, it may be solar home systems that need to be deployed, and we have also in the past mobilized some tailored risk mitigation instruments to unlock solar home systems in West Africa. It can be in some other cases in large capitals, like in the example I gave in DRC, then mini-grids. But in that case, for the replicability of those mini-grids, I think being able to have private financing and not public financing will be key. Which is why, I mean, we were like at the World Bank joining forces with IFC to try to identify what are the bottlenecks that prevent private financing in large-scale mini-grids, and come with those complementary products to unlock mini-grids. So I think, yes, it's not black or white. In some cases, public finance may be more accurate, but to get to the scale we need, private financing will be critical.
Understood. Thank you very, very much. And a question here, I think this is an understatement. Nadia, energy transition itself is already complex. How to support low-income countries in that endeavour? Now, you mentioned Burkina Faso and the Democratic Republic of Congo, but other thoughts that you may have?
I think it's about sustainability. So we have to look at all options to get to a sustainable environment, but also take into account the urgency of the timeline. There are a certain number of targets, and in particular the SDGs by 2030. So the idea is to be able to have a kind of flexible approach where we tackle urgent needs, in particular in terms of energy access. And there are a certain number of examples for that, while at the same time, we really work on the prerequisites to get to a sustainable framework. So the two perspectives are very important, and I think capacity building should be a key aspect to factor in to really empower the stakeholders.
Thank you, Nadia. And Nadia's going to stay with us because we're going to have more of a discussion with some experts. So if you've got more questions for her, please do put them on Slido later. Nadia, please stay with us. We're now going to move from sustainable production to efficient energy use. And we're going to look at a case study in Rajkot in the state of Gujarat in Western India, where, as you're going to see in this video, they're introducing electric buses and building energy efficient homes.
Rajkot is the fourth largest city of the Indian state of Gujarat. It has a population of more than 2 million and is the seventh fastest growing city in India. In 2018, the city of Rajkot analysed its carbon footprint with the support of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation as part of its Climate Resilient City Action Plan. Two important sources stand out: buildings and transport. Consequently, the city has taken concrete steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase energy efficiency in these two sectors. Buildings account for 40% of total energy consumption and cause 40% of India's CO2 emissions. Many buildings are yet to be constructed due to rapid urbanization. Increasing temperatures and a growing middle class lead to a growing demand for air cooling systems, and thereby to an increase of energy consumption by more than 10% each year. Against this backdrop, the case of the SmartGar 3 project in Rajkot demonstrates new construction methods for affordable, energy-efficient and climate-friendly social housing units. An analysis of the initial building design revealed that indoor peak temperatures on a typical summer day could reach 38 degrees Celsius, and that indoor temperatures would remain above 30 degrees centigrade for more than 260 days per year. To improve these uncomfortable living conditions, several energy-efficient construction elements were implemented in the SmartGar project in Rajkot in order to reduce the indoor heat during the day and to improve the potential of natural ventilation for better cooling at night. An example of new energy-efficient construction methods in Rajkot are the autoclaved aerated concrete blocks used for the construction of walls. These lightweight blocks provide better thermal insulation. They cut heat gains by half compared to a brick wall of similar thickness. An innovative assistant ventilation concept is also being implemented in one tower of this project to ensure ventilation to all flats, even if adequate wind speed is not available outside. A rooftop fan installed over the service shaft between flats pulls air, creating a negative pressure in the shaft. This induces airflow and improves the ventilation to the flats. Another example is to equip Rajkot's roofs with highly reflective China mosaic finish, which reduces heat gains from solar radiation. In addition, for new buildings, sliding windows are used instead of casement windows. This improves the natural ventilation of buildings, as these windows can be opened wider. The adoption of these new energy-efficient and climate-friendly construction measures can reduce the peak room temperature during summer by more than 5 degrees. This leads to better living conditions inside flats and reduces the need of air conditioners at the same time. To put this achievement into perspective, careful design of buildings and appropriate building materials can reduce the energy consumption by 30 to 45% with only marginal additional costs. This results in significant electricity savings and CO2 emission savings, and cheaper electricity bills for the inhabitants. The SmartGar project has practically shown how energy-efficient construction can improve the living conditions at little to no extra cost. These measures are now part of the National Energy Efficiency Standards for residential buildings, which are guiding the construction of at least 6 million social housing units across India. This shows how important cities like Rajkot are as pioneers, and how useful initial experience can be for future replications in other cities. Mobility is another important source of greenhouse gas emissions. To reduce the carbon footprint, the city of Rajkot wanted to electrify its bus rapid transit system. The Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation supported a study on how to electrify the bus rapid transit system, providing the rationale for the city to purchase 150 electric buses. With this measure, the city will avoid carbon emissions of 7,500 tons each year. The buses will also help to reduce air pollution, which still causes 2.5 million premature deaths in India every year. To sum it up, buildings and transport are extremely important levers for energy efficiency. We can start today, as there are affordable low-emission technologies available. We must start today, as the houses we build and the cars we buy today will determine our carbon emissions for decades. If we want to become carbon neutral by 2050, we need to make sure the houses are also carbon neutral. For its comprehensive approach on climate action, Rajkot received several awards and recognitions, such as the national winner of WWF's One Planet City Challenge for 3 times in a row.
There we are. 2 very impressive projects there, energy efficient construction and electric buses. And I'm really delighted that we're going to be joined live by the Municipal Commissioner of Rajkot, Amit Arora. I'm going to begin by asking him a few questions. Thank you for joining us, sir. And then if you would like to put questions onto Slido, I will address them to the Municipal Commissioner. And I'm just wondering, to begin with, I think that was 150 electric buses, and there's a lot of these energy efficient houses. I mean, it looks simple, but I'm sure it's not. What practical challenges did you face?
Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. First of all, Rajkot is, I think, one of the most strategically located district for about 6 to 7 districts of Gujarat. It serves as their commercial, educational, business center. And if you're talking about city bus, it's very touchy issue for people because low-income groups, poor people from nearby districts coming to Rajkot really desire the city transport system to be reliable and cheap. So I think the biggest challenge was to instill confidence in public that the bold move of replacing all our years-old diesel fleet buses by electric buses would not hamper the public transport in any way. And since we are an autonomous body, of course, we are always met with public scrutiny and public skepticism, since we are a self-funded autonomous body. So I think the biggest challenge was to somehow instill a confidence as such in public that electric buses, the technology is mature enough, has grown up enough to take care of a 2 million plus population city, which has a floating population of another 2 million who are coming from work, etc. Secondly, I think the cost factor, because compared to the diesel alternative, the diesel midi buses that we were using, the technology comes to be around 50% costlier as far as its capital cost is concerned. And the O&M costs are also around 20% costlier. But I think the framework that has been put in place by the government, we have capital subsidy under FAME 2 scheme, we have O&M subsidy of about 25 rupees per kilometer by our state government. So somehow the economics were taken care of. Another thing was that the technology was new. So the technological know-how, the procurement process that involved a lot of technology specific details. So, but I think we have been using the buses for about, successfully using about 30 electric buses on our BRTS routes for about 6 to 8 months now, and they are working very fine. And because of the subsidy models that have been put up by the state government, we are actually running our buses 8% cheaper than what we were running earlier. So I think buses have really taken off, and as of now, we are replacing our entire fleet of 100 buses by 150 electric midi buses.
Good news.
And,
sorry, sir, if I interrupted you. Did you want to carry on?
Yeah. Second initiative that you talked about was our green building initiative that we have put in place for the our low-cost housing that we are building for the urban poor. So, I mean, the low-cost housing market is very, very price sensitive because we are targeting, I think, the poorest of the urban poor when we are dealing with the low-cost urban housing. And again, it's like a greedy approach that when you are selling low-cost housing, people are more interested in the upfront capital cost that they have to bear rather than the maintenance that comes down over a period of time. So it took some time convincing people that yes, the initial capital cost is more, but with time, the benefits that we get in operations and maintenance and the as far as the maintenance of the buildings is concerned, it turns out to be a win-win situation for the city as a whole, as well as the consumer and consumer who is buying these houses. So I think the main factor that comes in when we are introducing any new technology is about its public acceptability. And both these technologies, as far as the green building initiative is concerned and the city buses is concerned, they have been well accepted. And the green building experiment that was done here was actually used for formulating our building code for all the cities of the country. And even we have right now a lighthouse project in which 6 global technologies from across the world are being used. And the bricks that we are using, the hollow blocks that we are using, it's being used there also. That also is coming up in Rajkot. It's a French tunnel foam technology. So I think gradually the initial threshold that's there about from accepting any technology is what was the biggest challenge, I guess.
And you had a bit of Swiss engineering help, a good example of international cooperation there.
Yeah, I think the Italy Foundation, funded by the Swiss Development Agency in partnership with the Swiss Development Agency, was, I think, one of the key component. I mean, they provided us technical expertise and the basic confidence that we wanted in the technologies that we were planning to adopt. And the knowledge gaps that were there were filled in by our partners. And I think Italy acted as a last mile aggregator to take our technologies to the ground. And right now also we have done a number of pilots and we are doing a number of pilots. We have installed a number of rooftop solar plants. We have created 5 pilot ground recharge projects. We have housing designs being coming up. We are also working on electric 3-wheelers for last mile connectivity. For electrical charging infra, we are working on even bulk water ground recharge. So yes, we are partnering, and wherever there is a lack of confidence or a lack of knowledge, I think our partners step in.
Thank you very much. We've got lots of questions coming in for you, Amit, and I know that you're also joined by Dr. Samir Mattel, who was involved in the planning and management of the energy efficiency building project. So technical questions go to Dr. Mattel, and other questions go to Amit, and I hope I'm going to direct them correctly. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. There's a question here perhaps for Amit. Energy efficiency in buildings typically involves hundreds of thousands of small renovation or construction projects. How do you move from small pilot projects to impact at scale?
See, again, as far as energy efficient housing is concerned, right now, as the city governments, we are focusing on the housing projects that we are building. And it has shown tremendous results. These projects are not there for the benefits per se, but the idea is to showcase these projects as model projects and have the larger construction industry, the private building industry, understand the benefits and harness the advantages that come with these efficient buildings. So, I mean, these are pilots, but these are supposed to act as lighthouses. They are supposed to act as compasses. They are more of a proof of concept to build a sustainable momentum of the entire construction industry to guide them towards more sustainable practices.
Amit, there's an urban planning question here which says, is it enough to switch from fossil fuels to electric mobility? Shouldn't we also ensure that people don't have to commute over long distances? For instance, by planning cities differently.
Yes, I think that's very valid, but that is possible only in the new developing areas. If you consider this, we have the entire Town Planning Act, and I think Gujarat is pioneer in the country as far as the town planning schemes or land consolidation schemes are concerned. But that is mostly possible in the newly developing areas. And yes, we are doing it. We have reservations for commercial spaces. We have reservations for industrial spaces. We have residential areas reservations. Somehow to create ecosystem, to create, spaces that are self-sufficient in their own sense to reduce transportation. But considering the city's history, and since Rajkot developed around a river, it developed on the banks of a river. Geographically, it's very, very spread. And in the old areas of Rajkot, you have to provide a sustainable transport. So yes, we have to reduce the length of the transport, but again, the existing transport has to be made greener. It has to be made more efficient.
Another question here. This is about the scaling of the electric buses. Are there any mobility policies in place at national or municipal level to foster scaling of electric buses? Or is this initiative primarily driven by the markets, electric buses being a cheaper alternative to petrol-powered ones?
Definitely, there are national policies that are guiding. As I talked, there is a FAME 2 scheme, which is a scheme for the faster adoption of electrical mobility. So the idea is that the government, as I said earlier, to make these projects viable, the central government is acting as a capital funder. So over the life of the project, for example, we have a contract period, 45 lakhs of capital subsidy is given per electric bus to the private players, which roughly comes to around 50% of the cost of the bus. As far as O&M is concerned, the operation and maintenance is concerned, yes, electric bus running is relatively costly compared to diesel or CNG alternatives. For that, the state government has a viability gap funding scheme. So for example, if I talk about Rajkot, the cost of running an electric bus is close to 50 rupees per kilometer. And for that 50, I have a viability gap funding of 25 rupees, that is 50% viability gap funding from the state government. The remaining cost is recovered from the ticket sales, the revenue that I earn by ferrying the passengers. So I think, as I told, because of these subsidy structures, we are right now running buses at 8% cheaper than we were running electrical buses. So, and this has led to adoption of electrical mobility across the country. One more thing, as a local body, we are also trying to provide, impetus to electrical mobility. We are coming up with local minor incentives to, focus on adoption of electrical vehicles. We are coming a policy in which we are giving land at token rate to private developers on a profit sharing basis to set up electrical charging infrastructure. For electrical charging infrastructure, we are giving property tax rebates. So yes, I think seeing the low cost of O&M, electric vehicles are somehow the future. And at all levels of the government, the central government, the state government, the city government, everybody is trying to promote a faster adoption of these vehicles to ensure that we have a greener city in the years to come.
Thank you. Now there's a question here. I've been to India a lot, but I've never been on one of these. So perhaps that's just me. Bajaj, B-A-G-A-J. Perhaps that means something to you. It says, a major means of transport of Indian population. I'm thinking of the tuk-tuk, but also major polluters in Indian cities. Are there incentives to transform them into solar-powered ones? Amit, does that mean something to you, Bajaj?
Yes. Bajaj is actually a very large automobile manufacturer that manufactures two-wheelers, that manufactures three-wheelers. So it's a large manufacturer. Okay. And yes, the central government, state government has introduced, again, capital subsidy for purchase of personalized vehicles, for use of personal transport vehicles. Second and important thing, a step that was taken by Indian government was by the Electricity Regulatory Commission that for charging of electric vehicles for personal use, the tariffs of the residential electricity, which is very cheap as compared to commercial or industrial electricity, the tariffs would apply. So that major block that was coming was about setting up of charging infrastructure. So the Electricity Regulatory Commissions have been formulating policies to make charging infrastructure cheaper on a commercial level as well as a professional, on a commercial level as well as on a personal level. So I think for personal vehicles, the market is very competitive. The cost of running would be almost 10% of what the cost of running a petrol or a diesel vehicle is. As far as, and the only roadblock was the capital cost, the initial investment that has been heavily subsidized by the central government as well as the state government. And as far as personalized or commercial charging infrastructure, that may be a fast charging station or that may be a battery replacement station. The policy framework is being put in place by the local governments also.
Thank you. This may be a question for Dr. Mattel, which is they're wanting to know about the energy consumption which was in the building complex that was supported by this Swiss and Indo project, this energy efficiency building project. How did it compare to other low-cost housing developments?
Yeah, so I think here one of the main issue is like when we talk about low-cost housing, actually people are using quite less electricity for even cooling also because people cannot afford air conditioning. If you look at urban India, hardly 10% of the households can afford air conditioning. So it is much more of an issue of providing thermal comfort. So the focus is that can we provide them temperatures, indoor temperatures, where with fan, they are comfortable. So the entire focus, the energy, the reduction in energy consumption will come over time because after 5 years, people may like to buy air conditioners. The main focus currently is that how do we are able to provide thermal comfort, we provide temperatures. If we do not do these interventions, the indoor temperatures can go up to 38 degrees centigrade. Here we have tried to bring them down to 32 to 33 degrees centigrade, in which in a fan a person can be comfortable. But also there are other measures which are being taken in terms of using efficient lighting, LED lighting, efficient fans, which then directly reduces the electricity bills of the project. Just to give you another example, that in the commercial building projects where this project has intervened, we have seen reduction of almost 40% in the electricity bills for the sort of the similar type of building. So those are the monitored performance for commercial building.
Thank you very much. And perhaps another question which we'll end with now, Dr. Mattel, is energy efficient civil engineering has been mainly developed with the Northern Hemisphere conditions in mind. Is there enough know-how on this topic for the Southern Hemisphere conditions? Or are we still at a development stage technology-wise?
So I think like the type of construction which we are talking about, like India also have a quite a rich traditional architecture and techniques which can be used. And now this project, people always ask that this Switzerland is a cold country and what are you going to bring in terms of construction? So I think there are, the building physics is now quite well understood. There are tools which have been developed under this project. One of the major requirement in, say, Indian conditions is that how do we provide ventilation in the houses? So a new tool has been developed where the architects can simulate the airflow around the building and inside the houses. So I would say that now there are tools which are available and the know-how has improved a lot, which can be applied in now bigger buildings which are coming in the sort of southern part, or you can say the developing countries which are more hotter climate.
Well, thank you very, very much. First of all, the Municipal Commissioner of Rajkot, Amit Arora, for talking to us about those two energy efficiency pilot projects and plans to scale them up, and also Dr. Samir Mattel. So thank you, gentlemen. That was really great to be joined by both of you. I'm sure it's quite late in India now, so thank you for staying up for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we've looked at energy production, energy efficiency, but of course, as we also heard from Nadia in her presentation and in the video, it's about getting the right regulatory environment for climate-friendly energy systems. So I'm delighted that we have in the audience an expert, Peter Wooders, Senior Director at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which is based here, as you may know, in Geneva, who's going to share some insights on how to end fossil fuel subsidies. We know that that is a hot political potato, and also establish CO2 pricing that enable and accelerate the energy transition. So Peter, please come here, and I am going to move over there.
Thank you very much, Claire, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. I've got a really long title here. Accelerating the energy transition by ending fossil fuel subsidies, imposing appropriate energy taxation. In much more simple terms, we need to get the prices right for energy. You know, we need to be paying the right amount and we need to be taxing the right amount. And this is a key enabling condition for us to move along the energy transition pathway. Also wanted to thank Silvio and all your team at SECO for the kind invitation today. I guess I've got a little thing here. Does that do anything? No. Yes. Okay, just very quickly. So I work with the IISD, International Institute for Sustainable Development, based in Geneva in Switzerland. We also have other offices around the world. And in the energy program, we have permanent staff in India, Indonesia, South Africa, and Canada, so a big focus on emerging economies. And one of the things we've been running for several years now is the Global Subsidies Initiative. You'll see the homepage here. www.isd.org/GSI, loads and loads of materials there. We set this up in 2005 because we recognised that governments needed help to identify subsidies which act against sustainable development and then help to reform them. That picture still remains today. We still need to be working on this, but just if you do need any more information on anything about subsidies, there's tons here. Very, very simple message here. Fossil fuel subsidies, what do? They incentivise the production and consumption of fossil fuels. It's as simple as that, thereby increasing greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. So, obvious question, why are we doing that now when we're trying to get towards the Paris Agreement, we're trying to get towards net zero targets? Some of the other effects they've had, this is a picture of a man from Indonesia. He's got a mask on. People wore masks before COVID, and they wore masks often because their air quality was so poor. And just behind him in the picture is the city of Jakarta on a sunny summer's day. So this is a lot of talk pre-COVID was about air pollution, about the damage it was causing, and what could we do about it. So fossil fuel subsidies are one of the major causes of some of the health problems that we see in places around the world. Okay, what are we talking about here? Very large numbers, at least $500 billion per year. There's not great data still on fossil fuel subsidies. If you do want to find some more data, fossilfuelsubsidytracker.org is a website put together by my organisation along with the OECD, and it gives a picture for 81 economies around the world of how big their subsidies are and how big they are in general. Here is a graph from 2010 to 2020. You'll see there was a peak here at something like 850 billion, and then 2020, because of the pandemic, it went down to 400 billion. There's a strong link still. Whenever oil prices are high, fossil fuel subsidies are high. But we do see a trend overlapped on that, which is there is also some, there is ongoing reform of subsidies. This is not a static picture. They are being reformed. And this chart here shows some of the countries that reformed either their fossil fuel subsidies, or at least partially, or introduced fossil fuel taxation between the years 2015 and 2020. And we counted at least 53 countries around the world who were doing this, but we still believe that they're not being reformed quickly enough. There's still very significant amounts of money going into this. Some of the examples of what happened in that 5-year period, on the producer side in Canada, some of the offshore oil credits were taken away as a subsidy to offshore production. In Germany, there was obviously a lot of talk about hard coal subsidies, and they were reformed by the end of 2018 in line with EU requirements. 2015 to 2017, we saw relatively low oil prices. India, Costa Rica, other countries took advantage of that and reformed a lot of their subsidies to transport fuels, which is one of the biggest ones there are. There's been a gradual reform, which is best practice if you can do it, in Egypt over the past 7 years, where they've announced in advance to the population that the prices of various fuels are going to go up, prices of electricity is going to go up, but it's by manageable amounts and it's been done in a planned process. And they've also been put in place, and this is one of the keys to subsidy reform, you've got to have another way of getting welfare to the population. If you can't support the poor and the vulnerable in your population, you're not in a good position to reform the subsidies that benefit them because you can't get welfare to them in any other way. In Ghana, there were some reforms also during the period where we had targeted support programs for income support and for health insurance to poor households. And similarly in Philippines, another example here, targeted cash transfers to help build a national safety net alongside lifeline tariffs for electricity for the poor. So a real takeaway here is about the welfare systems and about, as far as you can, support people, not fossil fuels. And this is a really important idea, I think, at the moment where we see high oil and gas prices and electricity prices, for example, in Europe, and some governments saying, why don't we reintroduce subsidies to protect the population? Well, our take on this would always be, of course it is a big concern for governments that people's cost of living is affected, but let's support those people by giving them the money and the means to pay their bills, not by distorting our energy markets, where so much of the money that goes to subsidies goes to the rich rather than the poor. Press again. Okay, the other side of this is then the taxation that we see on fossil fuels. Of course, living here in Switzerland, you'll see The price of gasoline in the forecourts now is over 2 francs per litre, probably the first time I've ever seen it. So there are high taxes on certain fossil fuels in certain countries, but to a large number of fossil fuels, taxes are very low. And amazingly, coal is virtually untaxed across the world. In many countries, it's not taxed at all. In other countries, it's taxed a very small amount. And here's from one of the studies we did a year or two back in Indonesia. We're trying to promote here the idea that Indonesia should start taxing coal. Another picture here of an incredibly polluted city. And a coal tax would generate very significant revenue. So if we look in India, there's been a tax at a level of about US dollars 5.5 per ton for the past few years. That's roughly 10% or a bit less or a bit more depending on the price of the value of a ton of coal. If that were instituted in Indonesia, Indonesia would get another $3.5 billion of revenue per year, which is a very, very significant amount to spend on clean energy, to spend on pensions, on healthcare, on infrastructure investments, on social development, on whatever it wants. So a relatively small tax on a fuel that isn't taxed at the moment and is causing significant harm can generate a lot of money. And what we're seeing here as well is within the sort of wider context, when COVID struck, we saw a lot of governments putting money into refloating their economies and making payments into their economies. And we tracked through something called the Energy Policy Tracker, and you can find it here again on the website energypolicytracker.org. We tracked the expenditure that 34 major economies and 8 multilateral development banks put into energy in response to COVID, so over the last couple of years. And you can see here, 40% of that money's gone to fossil fuels, 37% to clean energy, 23% to other, which is either where it's mixed or it's difficult to tell, or it's a little bit indirect. So the clear message here is even at this point in time, when governments have the money and they want to invest in the energy sector, they're still doing more on the fossil fuel side than they are on the clean energy side. And this cannot continue any longer. Final slide, and I'm talking a little bit too long. What should governments do next? In general, it's very important to set an end date for fossil fuel subsidy reform. You can't just say, oh, let's get on with this, let's do this, we'll do it when there's political windows and so on. And you'll see in international agreements 2025 is an important date. We don't have to wait to reform a lot of subsidies, and we should get rid of the worst ones now. That includes any subsidy to coal. It's a very polluting fuel for air pollution, for greenhouse gases. Upstream oil and gas, why are we still looking to incentivize the production of the finding and producing oil and gas when we've already got more than we could ever need if we're going to meet Paris targets, even at 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees. And then subsidies to transport fuels remain the largest source of subsidy around the world. They're relatively easy to reform. Do it step by step, like's happened in India with diesel and with gasoline. A huge amount of money can be saved in that way. Often fossil fuel subsidies have been in place for a very long time. I went to Chinese Taipei and did some studies there. Some of their subsidies have been in place for over 50 years. They're not fulfilling the same purposes they were designed for. So look at alternatives to those, better target anything that's left. Look to increase energy taxes where we can for governments, and swapping some of that money back into clean energy, other development priorities is indicated. It's really interesting this point in time we're at. Everyone's talking about high gas, high oil prices, high consequent electricity prices. And again, same messages I'm going to give again. Let's subsidize people and businesses like we've done with COVID, not fossil fuels. And then if fossil fuel subsidies are increased, if governments see that or they need to increase taxes, make sure that this is temporary and it's targeted to those who really need them. So there's a little bit of a fight at the moment, I think, to make sure that the fossil fuel industry doesn't use this crisis for its aims and that we keep on track with the clean energy transition. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. A couple of questions for you here. Peter, your presentation shows the benefits of fossil fuel subsidy reform, environmental, social, fiscal. Seems like a win-win. So why do so many reforms end up badly with people opposing them?
Okay, I think firstly, it's a little bit of a mischaracterization to say that many reforms end up badly. Some reforms end up badly, a lot of reforms don't end up badly, and the ones that don't end up badly, we don't hear anything about. So countries have, all countries are extremely aware that increasing energy prices by reducing subsidies or increasing taxes can be very difficult politically and is often not popular politically. So what should you do? There are various techniques. Firstly, communicate really well. Communicate about what the price of the current situation is. It's not by choosing to subsidize or by choosing to tax energy very low, we are imposing significant costs on our economies in financial terms and in terms of greenhouse gases and air pollution and therefore health. Very significant costs. So we've got to tell those stories and say, this is what the current situation is doing. We need to get rid of this. This is why we're doing it. We have to take into account as well political window, political opportunity, and very often it's when governments are first elected in their first 6 months where they've got the real chance to do these things, where they've got a popular mandate and they've got a lot of support behind them. But it's increasingly well known how to do reform well. Part of it's communications, part of it's building support, and then part of it is doing things at the right pace and doing the right targeting, plus making sure that those who are affected are getting something out of the reform as well. We can't just leave the poor and the vulnerable behind on this. So the message, I think the main message there is we know how to do this.
Sure. Now, there's a question here about, don't we need more than just fossil energy subsidy reform? Doesn't subsidy reform take a long time to see the impact?
Okay, that's a good question. Yes, we do need more than that. And I think one takeaway message here, though, is I mentioned this figure of $500 billion worldwide, which is a lower estimate because a lot of numbers on subsidies are not available. If all those subsidies were reformed, world greenhouse gas emissions would go down by up to 10%, somewhere between 8 and 10% from the modelled answers. That's a huge number. I mean, it's not going to solve the climate crisis, it's not going to solve the fiscal crisis, but it's a huge number. So it's not a panacea, it's not going to do everything for us, but firstly, it can generate a lot of emissions, it can generate a lot of scarce public finance, which we need for investment in clean energy and otherwise. And it's also levelling the playing field and making renewable energy investments and the other clean energy investments we need just more cost effective. So a lot of benefits. Not an answer to everything, but a lot of benefit.
Understood. Another question about international cooperation, obviously the subject of this forum. Should it not be linked to the government having to carry or bear fossil fuel subsidy reform? Could that be an increased incentive?
Yeah, this is a really interesting idea and one that comes up quite a lot where people say, look, we're not going to support you to build renewables in your country or to build a clean transport and so on unless you would sort out your energy subsidies first. I think it's unhelpful as a concept, to be honest. If you look at a country like India and its progression over the last 10 years, often in something like diesel fuel, you had subsidization and taxation at the same time. So certain authorities are subsidizing it, other parts, particularly at state level or local level, are taxing the fuel. These things coexist. And I think making the condition that you have to get rid of subsidies before you benefit from something else I think it's unhelpful, both in terms of linking policies and also because I think it's going to hold back reform rather than promote it.
Thanks, Peter. We've got a question on Ukraine, but I am just going to keep that one because I want not only to get Peter's response to that, but also to some other people who are going to join us. It's about whether the current conflict will have any influence on fossil fuel energy use in the longer term. So I've noted that one. Peter, I think it's time you took a seat.
Can't leave you up here on your own.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Peter's with us. Nadia Taubain, who spoke to us to begin with about renewable energies, is joining us. We've got 3 new people, too, that you can pick the brains of. One of them is in the room, Matthias Sulzer. I'd like to invite him to come and take a seat. He's at EMPA and ETH Research Institute in Zurich. He's a professor and senior researcher at the Institute's Urban Energy System Lab and also teaches at Luzern University of Applied Sciences and Arts. So that's great to have Matthias with us. We're also joined remotely by Nurzat Abdriasulova, founder and general director of Unison Group that gives strategic advice on sustainability in Central Asia to governments, financial institutions and donors. And we've got Fabio Eucalypto, finance director at Candy Solar, a Swiss company that provides solar solutions to SMEs in South Africa and India. So thank you to our new speakers who've just joined us. Again, please put more questions into Slido for them. If you've got a specific question for one of them, that always helps. And of course, the speakers, especially the remote speakers, if you want to add to something that somebody has said, please either put your hand icon up or to put your hand up physically so we can bring you into the discussion. Just going to start with a bit of scene setting from Matthias, expert in energy systems. I mean, what are the criteria for designing an energy system?
I have to switch on again.
I believe so.
Yes.
There we are.
Thanks. First of all, thanks a lot of having me. It's a great pleasure to be here in Geneva and also have this international setting. Learned quite a lot already, and if I can give any insight from my side, I'm more than happy to do that. Yes, my expertise is really in energy system transition, and if we talk about the challenges of energy systems, I have to really disappoint all the engineers. The technical solutions are not the challenge anymore. The real challenges which we are facing right now on energy systems are on social and economical topics. For example, as we heard also in the previous, from the previous presentation, is what we are facing is what kind of renewable energy system will be broadly accepted by users, for example. That means really the locals, how they go along with the new renewable energy system. And this affecting much more the transition than having a lovely and elegant technical solution. And the second point, just to point out these social and economical topics, is are the energy markets which are in place really fair? Probably not. As we see, even in Europe, we are facing markets which are not considering, for example, nature capital or also social needs. However, these markets driving actually the energy transition.
Thank you very much for that. Let's also just bring in, perhaps in the room and online, we're not so familiar with the energy system in Kyrgyzstan. So Nurzat, just very quickly, can you tell us what sort of energy is the main type of energy in Kyrgyzstan at the moment? Is it subsidized? Those socio-economic points that Matthias was making. And of course, importantly in the region, how secure is your energy supply?
Hello. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak and share about the energy situation in Kyrgyzstan. And as you might already know, that Kyrgyzstan is the mountainous country in Central Asia, which is a developing country facing many social economic problems as well. But in terms of energy security, Kyrgyzstan is also in a position that the energy security is a really important and most urgent issue for now, as we receive 90% of our electricity generation from the hydropower stations. In fact, Kyrgyzstan is also not energy independent, because almost 60% of our energy is imported. And in this situation, when for the last years, Kyrgyzstan is facing the also climate change challenges, like less precipitations happening for the last years. We are in the period of the drought. Our water reservoirs are not enough filled with the water, so our generation capacities is dropping very fast. So this is already bringing Kyrgyzstan for the last few years into the energy crisis, and which also brought in a situation that there is energy supply limitations, especially for the remote mountain areas. In other challenge is also with the energy distribution systems, because you know that Kyrgyzstan has been the part of the Soviet Union before, and all the energy infrastructure has been built at least like 40 years ago, and most of them is in obsolete conditions, which also requires the much of the financing investment in order to update this the systems. But since collapse of the Soviet Union for the 30 years, unfortunately, we were not able to build the new generation capacities, as well as mainly update our energy systems, which is also bringing the new challenges that consumption is increasing, but the new generation and new system of the distribution is not improving. And I would say also that in Kyrgyzstan, energy supply is as well is very social economic issue, because this is very much connected with the electricity tariffs. Kyrgyzstan energy system is highly subsidized, especially for the public, for the population. It is the maybe energy tariff in Kyrgyzstan is the most cheapest tariff in the world. And this already becoming such a social tool and political instrument that it's really very difficult to change the situation, because for the last revolutions which we had in the region, in Kyrgyzstan, was one of the reasons was also the tariff increase for the electricity, and then also people unhappiness about it, why it's happening, and it's also very connected with the electricity governance systems, connected with the transparency, with the tariff setting and other issues. So from this point of view, I would say that in the one hand that we are very much dependent from the natural resources as a water. In other hand, that we are dependent from the fossil fuels, which we are importing from the neighbor countries, mostly from Russia and Kazakhstan. And also the thing is that Kyrgyzstan has a lot of technical potential of the other renewable energies like solar, because Kyrgyzstan has a huge, Kyrgyzstan has a very good solar installation, like 300 per day solar days in Kyrgyzstan. So that's a situation so far, and I think that that's we continue to face until we changed and made the major reforms in our system.
Thank you, Nurzat, very much for bringing us up to date on that. I mean, let's move to Ukraine. It was one of the questions that came in for Peter. Perhaps I just ask Nurzat, because of course you said that you import a lot of fossil fuels from Russia. So I just wondered what impact has the Ukraine crisis had on that energy supply?
We import from Russia the gas. We like 100% dependent for the natural gas resources, and also for the oil. We also import some part of the coal from Kazakhstan. So from this point of view, it's always quite a very sensitive issue, because as the tariffs is also subsidized, it's also the economical issue that how much the price of the coal and oil and gas will be costing for Kyrgyzstan. And Kyrgyzstan is the part of the custom union, which actually unites Russia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan and Belarus. And then with the Ukraine situation, this might be there also. We are actually very concerned about it, but so far we are not facing the problem. But with our economic system is pretty much connected with the system of Russia by the economic, food security, a good supply and everything. I think that we will be affected quite heavily.
Thank you very much for that. I think the audience question, I wrote it down, perhaps for you, Peter. The current conflict in Ukraine, will it have any influence on fossil fuel energy use in the long term? Be good to get your thoughts.
No, it's an excellent question, Claire, and thanks to whoever asked this. And I just want to go back a couple of steps before the crisis. So in Glasgow, there was COP26 last year, and various initiatives were launched at that point. One of them was something called the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, and it's a group now of 14 countries, and the 8 core members of that have committed to ending licensing for new oil and gas. So they won't issue any more licenses for any oil and gas in their territories. And this is a first movers organization, and they're looking to build up that diplomatic group of countries. And it's one of the first things that's happening on the diplomatic side about oil and gas. So the secretariat for that is the first permanent host is ISD, my organization, and very shortly after the invasion of Ukraine, the question started coming in, what does this mean for this alliance? Is this alliance, do we need to disband it? Do we need to mothball it? Is it still relevant? Whatever. And I think the answer came pretty quickly there. In the long term, it only strengthens the alliance. This is another reason why we need to get off oil and gas. We've already got reasons about climate change. We've got reasons about air pollution. We've got reasons about finance. Typically now, oil and gas investments don't pay well. They've underperformed in the stock market for many years. Many investors have lost money on projects. They're not a good investment. So in the long term, it strengthens the case. It means countries should get more away from oil and gas. What we've got is this very short-term issue where governments are rightly very concerned about security of supply now. And it's a basic function of government that we've got to provide the goods and services that our populations and our economies and our businesses need reliably and at affordable rates. And so you'll see in Europe in particular sort of scrambling around saying, where can we get some more oil supply from? Where can we get some more gas supply from? And there's relatively limited amounts of extra capacity you can put in the short term. So the battleground, if you like, is on the sort of fossil fuel industry side. They're saying from this crisis, we need to invest in more oil and gas production so that we can deal with security of supply. That isn't going to help the situation right now. It's a medium term, it's a long-term play. And on the other side, we'll see from the clean energy community saying, well, this is where you get to if you're reliant on oil and gas. If you're thinking about long-term investments for security, go for wind, go for solar, go for batteries. They're cheaper, they're better for security because they're more domestic, they don't involve imports, and of course they help with climate change and environment. So there's a real sort of battleground right now, and I think it's incredibly important that the case is made that clean energy is the way to go at this point in time.
So you think that it is going to speed up the energy transition, at least in the long term. What about you, Matthias? What's your take on what Peter's just said?
Just taking up that argument, and I fully agree, there's a battleground right now, and unfortunately there's a lot of ideologic arguments behind that, and sometimes losing some facts and how we go backwards, how we can actually reflect that more better. But taking up, like, yes, we have to install PV. Great, where the PV panel comes from. Do we are not getting into another dependency by having China as the major supplier of like PV panels, for example. So what we are looking, especially when we are talking about long-term transition, about the strategies, and what we can actually learn from the Ukraine crisis, then it is one major lesson. You shouldn't build up a strategy which relies on a particular energy carrier. In particular, Germany, in my mind, Germany has one of the largest challenge now to solve in Europe, because they really build up their transition by having this intermediate gas energy carrier to actually transform the whole industry towards net zero, but they rely on these 20 years of gas using, having invested in Nord Stream 2, and they can rethink that, in my mind, completely. And the learnings is really not, and when you build up your energy transition strategy and you want to have a resilient energy system at the end, choose diversification as much as you can, even it costs a little bit more, but at the end you have the freedom to react geopolitically, but also from the resource side to have your freedom where you actually can import your energy carriers.
And so have I understood, yes, we're in a world of petrostates, and now we might have this world of electrostates where all the lithium and the cobalt and the nickel is going to be for the electrification of vehicles.
Yeah, but my argument is really not only have to be electrical, try to be in a technical sense diverse, but also on energy carriers be diverse. Hydrogen, maybe biomass, electricity. There's a lot of opportunities which you have to explore if you want to build up a resilient energy system in the future.
Sure, diversification. And I think I should bring in at this stage Fabio, who has been waiting patiently because he is one of the solutions in this energy mix. You're providing solar solutions to SMEs in India and South Africa. Perhaps, Fabio, you can briefly just tell us what your business model is so that we all understand it.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. Maybe before going deeply into the business model, just briefly, why do we provide solar solutions to SMEs? Because that talks and legitimates the business model. We have a company purpose, and the company purpose is to power a more sustainable planet, one rooftop at a time. And CANDI stands for C and I, which is an acronym for commercial and industrial. So in other words, we build solar installations on the rooftop of commercial and industrial companies, and that we do particularly within the SME sector in emerging markets. Now, that is because we want to power a more sustainable planet as quick as possible. We want to accelerate that transition, and SMEs are a low-hanging fruit. According to a recent World Bank report, I very much like to refer always to 90% of SMEs, about 90% of companies in emerging markets are SMEs. So companies obviously are an evident material part of any country's power consumption. And that power consumption, particularly in emerging markets, is often driven by coal and petrol, particularly the two markets we operate in, which is India and South Africa. So basically having SMEs switching from coal, petrol-based grids to solar is a tremendous lever to accelerate energy transition. And our business model basically wants to accelerate that adoption by basically removing one of the absolute key barriers that still prevent SMEs and companies also more in general to go solar, which is financing. I think it was mentioned a couple of times today already. Financing is really the nut to be cracked. And in a nutshell, our business model tries to crack that nut for SMEs by building a solar installation for a customer, an SME customer, for free. We don't charge anything up front, nor we charge anything during the maintenance during the operations. Then the only thing we charge is the energy we sell to the customer from that solar installation, and that energy is sold at the price which is always lower than the grid price. So there is an immediate saving for the customer. And the best thing is that at the end of the contract, basically the customer takes over the solar installation owns it, and hence can generate free power for a while longer than the contractual tenor. And that all sounds very great. And why does it work? How can it economically work? It's because electricity prices, again, particularly in the markets we operate, keep increasing while the cost of solar equipment keeps decreasing, apart from the recent volatility we had due to the global supply chain issues. But in general, solar equipment prices do decrease. So that's basically what Candy is all about.
Thank you, Fabio. So obviously a good financial deal for the people who use your services. I mean, what is your challenge, though, in terms of scaling up?
Yeah, so now that's a funny thing. We take away the headache from the customer, which is the financing, and we have the same on the other hand. So really, with all the issues you may have in a company that scales up fast, clearly the overarching limit is capital, which I often like to refer to as the true fuel of solar. And because solar is infrastructure, right? And infrastructure is by definition a capital intensive business model. And the problem is not the availability of capital. And I like very much the graph that was shown in one of the previous presentations, I think by Peter, about subsidies going equally into coal and renewables. Which you know, like now, apart from the point that equally isn't the right mix, but there is capital available. So the issue is not the capital, not having access to the capital. The issue we see is the premium with which that capital comes. Because being based in Switzerland, on the one hand, I observe negative interest rates on a bank account. On the other hand, we pay 8 to 11% on capital to purely build a solar installation that will repay its capital over a 5 to 6 years tenor. So, you know, sure, I mean, it's emerging markets, sure, it's solar, sure, it's on the top of a roof of SME in India. But is it 800 to 1,100 basis points premium above the risk-free rate? I'm not sure. And that really prevents us to grow, because we can't just raise capital. We need to literally fight to bring the cost of capital to a level that still makes it affordable for the business model to exist.
Yes,
Fabio, I really love your approach, but still struggling a bit with your business model. If the market, today's energy-only market, which works perfect with your business model, are changing in the future to more a capacity market, is your business model still working? Because then the energy is much cheaper. Yeah. They can actually get from the grid, because they pay capacity first as a lump sum, and then the energy, it's maybe just 6 cents, 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So I'm struggling a bit if this business model, which relies fully on an unfair market, on an energy-only market, which is beneficial right now for you, is that a really fair, or is that a long-term business model?
Well, the question I need to ask is, what geography are we referring to? Because South Africa, I don't know if you've been to South Africa, but the grid is at best providing, you know, a very not enough power to the people. So there's great infrastructures in the countries we operate, such as South Africa. India is maybe one of the better examples, but if you look also to Kenya or other African latitudes, emerging markets in general, the grid infrastructure is a constant loss-making business for the national utilities. Now, if we talk about Europe, it's a bit of a different discussion than whether we talk about these emerging markets, because again, we're going in at the moment at 40 to 50% below the grid, and still we basically are able to cover the interest rates we're charged on our capital. So I always love to say, like, our competitor is not the grid, it's the competitor that does the same business model, because we're so much away from the grid price, while that grid price keeps increasing in markets like South Africa at the 5 to 15% rate a year, with no real outlook on how the government and the local utilities will bring that grid to a level that can ultimately, bring prices down.
Peter, let me ask you about this investment issue with scaling up and this access to capital markets, perhaps Swiss capital markets, which might be a bit risk averse, I don't know, to in investing in these sort of projects.
I think this is a really good discussion, and it's great to hear Matthias and Fabio, your thoughts on this. And quite a lot of the work we do at ISD is with international processes and fora, and it often comes back to some of the multilateral development banks, and we heard the sort of excellent, I thought, intervention earlier from Nadia, was it, at the beginning? Yep. About what sort of the World Bank's doing and so on. And maybe this is a question more to Nadia, is, I think from an NGO perspective, we're expecting more from the World Bank and others at the moment, that more of the money should be going, that you're lending should be going into clean energy than it is. Yeah. Now, clearly your remits and your orders are given by your shareholders, your stakeholders, which are the governments around the world, and through the senior management and so on. But is there a case, the case I would simply like to make is that we just need more money to go into clean energy. Yeah? We can't wait on the market to provide it. We can't accept 8 to 11% premiums that Fabio was just talking about. And we just need to get more money into this, and the big private, the big public sector lenders like yourselves need to be at the forefront of this, such that you can de-risk projects and show the direction. And I guess this is, you probably agree with a lot of this anyway, that you want to, you'd like to see that your shareholders, your stakeholders are just telling you to move more into this direction. We can't wait for the usual political processes and market requirements and whatever, and to get commercial lending. We just got to get on with it. So really interested in what you think, Nadia, about whether we can do more to put pressure on the banks and the shareholders to move money in this way.
Nadia, over to you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. So the bank has adopted the climate change action plan, and I think we all agree here on the importance of trying to make available concessional finance to support renewable energy projects. But I think it's not only a question of amount of, let's say, of funding. It's also about where to direct this money to get that leverage, which is why I presented before the importance of making sure that there is this medium-term pathway for governments, and where they are addressing the prerequisites to unlock private investments, so that at the end we get to reduce that risk premium that has been mentioned by Fabio before. I think this is critical. I mean, we have heard it several times that financing is there, but we have also to acknowledge the difficult situations of developing countries, and it was one of the points also that Fabio made when he talked about the markets. We talk about here about clean energy projects that are going to be financed by the private sector, which means under project finance scheme. So if we are talking about commercial banks and IPPs taking the risk over 25 years, in a country where the main source of revenues will be coming from a utility which itself is in a difficult situation, I think we really need to come with an integrated approach to make the overall system sustainable. So there was I think the risking has to be done at various levels. So identifying sustainable renewable energy target, it's one thing. So it will lead to reduce the grid risk. Having a strategy, a sound strategy, will also help for that. But at the end, you will have also those risk mitigation instruments to reduce the risk premium. But in some cases, in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, this may not be enough. I mean, even when your solar is the least cost option, still some utilities are in situations where they cannot afford that. If you take the example of Liberia, for example, in that case, it may make sense. And I would like to also say that to answer one comment or one question that was before on what to do more for low-income countries. I think viability gap funding in that case can help, because it's about also making that option that is already least cost even more affordable for the utilities that are paying. So I don't think there is any magical solution. The idea is really to work, as I said before, on 2 time frames. So we address urgent needs and we come with practical solutions so that we are supporting the countries, we are a developing bank, but at the same time, we work on those prerequisites to build this trajectory, a sustainable trajectory. We ground in private financing, and we try to innovate in terms of instruments. The reason why I wanted to give the DRC example, it was because this instrument did not exist. We created it. We joined forces with the Green Climate Fund, and World Bank worked with IFC, and we created this instrument to address the demand after having an extensive market sounding with the private players on mini-grids business, to be able to come with a solution that we thought would be replicable and sustainable. So let me stop there, but it's a fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Peter, I think, would like to ask you one more question. Then I would like to go to Fabio on solar and pick up on hydrogen. And with them, we're going to look at some energy efficiency measures and bring in Nurzat. Before we've got many audience questions that I want to take in the time we've got. Peter.
Okay. Just very quickly, there's a lot of campaigning at the moment, Nadia, from civil society organisations and so on to try and get the major banks and other lenders to not lend to fossil fuel projects anymore. How important is this for the transition? Would that make a huge difference, or is the examples you've been giving about DRC and Liberia and so on, it doesn't really matter? Just really welcome your thoughts.
I'm not sure to have understood your question, Peter, on this. I mean, the bank has been, of course, supporting the efforts on fossil fuel reform and others. So I think
taking money, not lending to fossil fuel projects at all anymore. Is that useful to you, or is that just so it's the whole lending thing? Saying we're not going to lend to coal anymore, or to oil and gas exploration, or to coal-fired power plants, or whatever. Is that helpful within this clean energy transition?
Well, I will not, on that I would really refer to the official position of the World Bank. I'm not here able to comment on that. I think my point is really to try to focus on supporting developing countries, make the most out of their domestic resources, renewables. And I think I would like just to add one comment, because it has been mentioned before in this energy security topic. And I think it's also something that we see on our side with a lot of countries trying to focus more efforts on getting a better knowledge of their own value chains, on how they can benefit from those projects and how they can position themselves. And this has started before even the Ukraine crisis. It has started with the COVID crisis, when some countries had some plans, but they could not operate them because the people who were supposed to come and fix the issues could not travel. So suddenly you have an asset, but you cannot operate your asset because you don't have the skills in the country or the spare parts. So this topic has come now really at the forefront. Yeah. Thank you.
I actually was just wanting to pick up, Nadia is deflecting that question, but it was really interesting that there's lots of people who are asking, why are the banks still financing coal? I mean, Peter, what's your view, or Matthias? Yes.
Also, we do some studies with, of course, with the largest Swiss banks. And interestingly, if we talk about green financing and why not switching to full green financing, it's really the lack of the regulations which are not that developed that they can, for example, invest into green financing with pension funds or with other regulations from the governmental, and even some of them in the international regulations are prohibited them regarding risk, and especially what Nadia mentioned, the long term of green financing, the 25 years, banks really struggling on that because they are not used to do that on an interest rate which is attractive for green financing.
There's another working session on green financing, so I'll steer the subject back to energy. Fabio, just wondering with your project to Candy Solar, I mean, does it stop for you with solar, or have you got other projects that you want to get into, such as storage?
No, look, thanks, Claire. I think, no, it does not stop with solar, and it also does not stop with conventional packaging of solar, right? Because we heard now in the room, like grid operators, 25 years. I think it's the entire business model also that needs to be innovated in the decentralized energy distribution, particularly, right? And I'll come to the technologies as well in a second, but in terms of, like our offerings going between 3 to 10 years, and obviously the grid operator is not part of this entire discussion, because everything it happens behind the meter, and since it happens behind the meter, it happens on the premises of the company, and the company requires more than only solar, right? Solar we really see as only the first step and the lowest hanging fruit, because it provides immediate savings. Now, obviously, there's other things that can help the client on the sustainable infrastructure side, which does not only save, but also increase productivity, which is storage, right? I mean, if we look in South Africa, particularly one of our markets, load shedding, so basically the switching off the grid for certain periods during the day or during weeks is something that hurts companies in South Africa a lot. An alternative is obviously burning diesel, but that's not cheap as well. And for the environment, it's also not good. And so storage, we come in with a storage solution and basically then, are able to also increase the productivity. The next step, we're now starting to look into companies in India, is providing EV charging infrastructure. Because often industrial players want to switch their fleet from petrol to EV. It's by the way, a huge topic in India, particularly at the moment. But then it's the question of how do I charge it, right? And ideally, I charge it with renewables. And so EV charging infrastructure is often a very simple add-on that can be added to the solar part. And then obviously the entire discussion about energy efficiency, because if you have a solar on the rooftop of a company, if you have storage and you have EV charging infrastructure, you're literally going to know everything about the load and power consumption of the client. So at that stage, that's when you can start also provide energy efficiency retrofits. So it's an entire suite of things that can happen, again, behind the meter on the premises of companies that would like to obviously go that path. But again, it's not their core business. They don't want to take the risk of those things not working. So they need someone that pays for it and then ultimately, packages it in a safe to own model.
Nuzhat, let me bring you in before we take some questions from the audience on energy efficiency. It would be good to get your thoughts on what needs to be done better on energy efficiency.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Yes, energy efficiency, I think it's a very important part of the energy security issue because especially in our countries, it's a mentality that we think always from the generation point of view if there is a lack of electricity or energy. But in other hand, that we have to also look at how efficient is our consumption and how much energy actually we can save from this point of view. And Kyrgyzstan is one of the energy intensive countries in the world. We are in the 15th place in the world by the energy energy intensity use. Even so, that Kyrgyzstan is the agricultural country and most of the energy consumption goes to the households and public sector. So it means that the buildings are high consumers of energy, and the risk energy loss goes up to the 60%, which is, I think, a huge wasting of it. This is also connected in a way that Kyrgyzstan is continental climate. So we do we do need energy during the winter time for the heating. And now when there is the climate change, heat waves are increasing, we need more energy also for cooling. From this point of view, we think that in Kyrgyzstan, when as a developing country cannot have a capital cost, cannot afford the capital cost to build the high and big energy generation units, we need to pay much more attention in our energy efficiency. That's why in Kyrgyzstan is putting the attention on the energy efficiency of the buildings. And primary law about energy performance of buildings has been developed and adopted in Kyrgyzstan, which is pretty much in line with the European Union energy directives, energy performance directives, EPBD. So the law is adopted, and now there is actually established the minimum requirements for the energy efficiency of buildings. Accredited independent experts, which will be doing the energy certifications of the buildings. So the new buildings and the buildings which will be refurbished like lays into the minimum energy requirements. And this includes not only the building envelope improvement, but also improvement of the heating systems, also the hot water systems, and other technical systems of the building. Another thing is very important, I think, for our countries is access to the finance, because there was a little bit talk about also funding issues. And this was the thing is that even we push the people or the SMEs for the energy saving. If there is not affordable funding for such activities, nothing can happen. You know, even so that the law was, for example, adopted 10 years ago, there wasn't much done. And this was pretty much connected because of there is a low tariffs, no incentives. But in other hand, that there is not also affordable fundings, why they should do it, and how they can do it. And the very interesting experience which I can share from the Kyrgyzstan case is a successful project which was done by the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development together with European Union as a blending financing. And this was the credit line with the EU incentive grants for the customers who is achieving the good energy efficiency results in their premises and in their businesses. This is actually was the connected also with the good technical assistance implemented by the local commercial banks. And with the $55 million credit line, Kyrgyzstan has achieved quite good examples of the project implementation. So there's more than 3,300 projects implemented over the country. it shows very much interest. It could help actually increase the understanding of the energy efficiency benefits, increase the interest of the businesses for the modernization of their premises and machineries and other activities, and also to bring the quite much of the energy saving and CO2 cuttings. And this is, I think, a great example when the energy efficiency actually shows that through the public and then through the financial institutions together with the very good established policy dialogue.
Nozat, thank you very much for those comments. We've got so many questions from the audience. I want to ask some of those now. So we've been, as we see, we've been looking at renewable energy production. We've been looking at some of the financing challenges. We've been looking at energy efficiency. We've got a question which has received a lot of votes, which is: popular opinion is convinced that renewable energy cannot meet all our energy needs at any time. That's why politicians want to keep fossil fuel options open. How to change the public discourse? Matthias, Peter, perhaps one.
Thanks for that question. This is actually our major question in research, how we want to design the energy system, which has to be reliable 24/7. Sorry about that. And of course it has to be affordable, and it has also to be fair for everybody to have access to this energy system. But renewables are fluctuating. They are not like as a nuclear power plant with a base load or something like that. This has new challenges for the system itself. However, there's many solutions already around there. As I mentioned before, there's not a technical challenge right now to do that without fossil fuels. It's just about the penetration of the new technology. Just imagine the whole topic about hydrogen, which allows us to actually integrate new technique, which works perfectly together to wind and to solar. For example, to make that really concrete, Norwegian has now an offshore wind project which integrates hydrogen production on the offshore site itself, shipping then the hydrogen, for example, to Rotterdam, and having a second energy carrier which is storable and which can be in combination to wind and solar be converted to have a full supply, security of supply for that country which get on that technology.
That's a whole nother discussion about hydrogen and getting to green hydrogen, I think, that we most probably don't have time for now. Let me move on to another question. Renewable energies also have environmental costs. How do we ensure preservation of ecosystems while achieving the energy transition? Who would like to take that one?
No, go for it. Yeah.
Go for it. We're running out of time, so the quicker that you're faster off the mark, the better.
I think very, very quickly, whenever we hear questions like the previous one or like this one, let's fairly compare the alternatives. So, for example, when we talk about the green minerals that are going to be required for batteries going forward and for solar plant and whatever, people will say, these come from conflict-driven countries, and there's going to be wars about these, and there's going to be problems with supply chains, whatever. Well, just look what's going on with fossil fuels and has been for the last 50 or 100 years, right? So let's try and compare like for like. So much of the world's geopolitics and its problems is caused by fossil fuels. So, of course, there's going to be some issues with whatever we bring in replacement, but we've got to compare them on a fair basis. And I think here as well, just going back to the previous question as well, a lot of this is about demonstration. A lot of the popular views that we have as societies and individuals are often old and outdated and are not really based on any fact or science. They just, subsidy reform leads to riots, and if we go down the renewable route, we'll run out of cobalt or nickel or rare earths or something, or China will hold us to ransom. Now, we are seeing countries now having increasingly high shares of renewables in their generation day after day, and it isn't coming with problems. So, to my mind, it's all about demonstration, and that will change the narrative.
Thank you.
Just for comparing, fully agree, Peter, but we have also to learn. I'm also convinced we shouldn't do the same mistakes. Yes, there is an issue regarding this environmental impact of renewable technology, and yes, we have to do our homework on that we are not getting in the same stage, even if it is comparable.
Nurzat, we see from the discussion today, and they've just gone and removed the question, but if I can remember it, it was something along the lines of, the discussion today has focused very much on energy production and renewables. How do we make sure that energy efficiency becomes more popular? I think that was the question, which has suddenly magically disappeared. So let's end on an energy efficiency point from Nurzat.
We believe that energy efficiency is the great way of achieving the energy security, and this is actually the cleanest energy. You know that the energy which you don't have to use is the cleanest energy. So I think that before we think about the additional generations, we also, first of all, we think about that how we use efficiently what we have already here. So our experience shows that if there is a good understanding of the benefit of energy efficiency and a good solution of how to do it, and there is a good connection of with suppliers together with the financing and together with the technical assistance, when the engineers can explain it, how it can be done and why it should be working. There is political support and good incentivizing from the economic and social point of view, that works so well. So I hope that will be actually the approach in many countries, and I hope so that also that Kyrgyzstan will continue to doing it priority, because Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia is the only country who has the primary law and energy efficiency buildings, and that's also I think that right approach to make it priority, because it's 50% of primary energy in Kyrgyzstan is consumed by the buildings, and that's where we start. And this is good on not only for the energy security, but this is also helps to reduce air pollution, to reduce the CO2, and to stop the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Well, you can see this was broad-ranging, this discussion, and I'd really like to thank Nadia Taubain, Peter Wooders, Matthias Sulzer, Nurzat, Abdria Soluva, Fabio Eucalypto, as well as, of course, the Commissioner of Rajkot, Amit Arora, and Dr. Samir Maitel, who we spoke to earlier. There is a poll on Slido which says that what is your key takeaway from this working session 2 on sustainable energy? If you have enough energy to carry on using Slido, please fill that in. Thank you, everybody, for being with us for day 1. Please come back for day 2. Thank you.